Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our Tech Talk. I got Nick Blozan here. He's one of our security engineers and really looking forward to going through this. We're talking about the 7 best practices for implementing layered cybersecurity. Again, Nick is one of our security engineers, security experts, and came up with this 7 best practices layered approach. And we're going to dive right in and looking at what these 7 layers are and get Nick's big brain expertise on them. So Nick, let's dive right in. Tell me about this layered cybersecurity. Why do we care about the layered approach to cybersecurity, and what is it?
Well, that's a great question, and I think one of the things that everybody is seeing is that breaches are becoming more and more commonplace. And what's more, the scams themselves are continuing to evolve. And let's face it, these cyber criminals are pretty savvy. So the best way to mitigate the approach is through a layered approach. So the goal here is to slow and hinder a threat until it can be completely neutralized. So you'll hear people say that you can't completely stop threats at all places from ever happening, but you can try to slow them down and try to recognize them as soon as you can so that you can eradicate them.
Diving right into the 7 layers, your first layer that you're coming up with is vulnerability management and penetration testing and doing an assessment of the security layers that we would recommend.
Yeah, this is the place we like to start because this allows us to understand the nature of what's going on in any customer environment. So the vulnerability assessment is really about determining, are there systems that are outdated, systems that may require an update, things that need to be kind of updated to the current level. And then the penetration testing is really about determining if there are any vulnerabilities in the environment. These are the vulnerabilities that hackers are going to try to exploit. So if you do regular vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, this will really improve your overall security and help you understand what the next step should be in terms of setting up a security portfolio.
Is it for on-premise only, or would it cloud-based services, co-locations, cloud-based infrastructures also?
Yeah, it's both. So normally we're looking at external IP addresses or web URLs. These are the entry points. And so once we have those IP addresses known, that's what's going to help us understand what we're going to be testing. But it could be cloud-based, could be on-prem, anywhere where there's an external IP address. That's what we're looking for.
Great. Number 2, patching and N.O.C monitoring. Go ahead.
Yeah, this really sets up our perimeter protection. So a lot of what we'll talk about going forward is going to be a security operations center, but this first step is really about the network operations center. And what we're talking about here is making sure that every machine is up to the current rev level in terms of the operating system and also in terms of any security patches that may need to be applied. And then within your security hardware, like the firewall as an example, we want to use the N.O.C to make sure that firewall is up and operating and it's operating at optimal level. And so this is really what the N.O.C in terms of patch and patch management and also in terms of N.O.C monitoring and N.O.C remediation will do just to make sure that your perimeter is running as it should.
Right. And N.O.C is Network Operations Center for us non-geeks out there. Yeah, and we can't skip right over to advanced security services and systems without having that base level foundation of security, like what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, the N.O.C is usually about performance and availability, and the SOC, which is the Security Operations Center, is usually about really detecting and thwarting cyber threats. But you're right, without the knock, you really don't know that all these devices like the firewall are running and running at their full operational level, and that all these other systems are being maintained and patched appropriately. So the knock is really the foundation. And then as we continue the discussion, we'll start talking about the actual security solutions that we'll be deploying to look for cyber threats.
Great. Number three, we got log monitoring and threat detection. I really, this one is really neat to get into some AI and some really learning the business and really thwarting the bad guys from coming in.
Yeah, what you find out about this log monitoring is that almost every device or application or server will emit a log. And this log will record everything that occurs on that device, every piece of network traffic that comes through, every login attempt, any change of user access level, and things like that. So basically, what we're talking about here is a SIM tool, which stands for Security Information and Event Management. And this tool will aggregate the logs from many different devices, for example, the firewall, Office 365, Active Directory, things like that. And then the SIM tool will start to analyze the data in these logs, and it will correlate events across different devices. So for example, if you had a big spike in network traffic combined with a bunch of failed login attempts, that could be identified as a cyber threat, and the SIM tool will generate an alert. And that's when the SOC, which is a team of security analysts, will go and look at that alert, they'll validate it, and they'll determine if there's something actionable to be done to mitigate that threat. So the SIM tool is really a very broad-based infrastructure tool, and where it really comes in handy, and you mentioned this earlier, any of the customers who are subject to compliance audits, whether it be HIPAA in the medical side or things like PCI or SOX on the financial side, these guys need to have reports that are proving that they're monitoring logs and proving that they have this kind of security system in place. And so these SIM tools will generate very nice reports that will be used by the compliance auditors to facilitate the audits.
That's great. All right, number four, endpoint detection and response. The new generation of endpoint protection, I think, where the Trojans and malware and where it's all headed and where it's here now, the traditional antivirus and anti-malware is not working anymore.
You're absolutely right. I mean, traditional antivirus software is looking at things like signatures inside of attachments, which is fine, and you still need to do that. But much of today's cyber threat on the endpoint is coming in through an email link or somebody downloading an application that, as you said, may have a Trojan horse malware running inside of it. So the latest generation of endpoint protection is what we call endpoint detection and response, EDR. And EDR is doing something really cool, which is it's looking at that endpoint and noticing if it's behaving in a way that's different from how it normally behaves. And that might include large file transfers coming off that machine or processes running in the background that normally weren't there. And then this EDR software will also generate alerts. The SOC will respond to those alerts and determine if there's something going on in the endpoint. And if there is, it will immediately isolate that endpoint so that that machine can't spread some kind of malware to other devices on the network. And it also has the ability to roll back to previous versions of the endpoint state prior to when this cyber threat started to show itself. So this is very powerful, and it's really the state of the art in endpoint security.
So not only identifying it, but like you said, like taking it offline so it can't infect the environment or infect other devices, right?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing with a lot of these endpoint cyber threats is they're coming in and they'll sit there in a latent state for potentially days, weeks, or even months, and they'll start to propagate throughout the network. And before they ever show themselves, you may have the entire network could be infected. So, yeah, this is really about detecting something very early before it starts to show itself to the user, even, and be able to take immediate action to isolate that threat and be able to shut it down.
Well, already getting a sense of why the layered approach is so important when you get all these different, we're at number four, and they're already talking with each other, right? The different approach, the NOC and the SOC and the EDR, they're already talking to each other to help protect the environment.
And as a matter of
So
fact, just to mention it, the EDR solution, let's say it's managing 50 endpoints. it also generates a log, and that log from the EDR server will be ingested into the SIM tool as well. So then
Right.
you have the SIM also getting an overview of what's going on in the endpoints, as well as each endpoint is being managed by the EDR tool. So you're right, there's a lot of interaction between these different layers.
One of the favorites right now is email threat protection. How do we get rid of the spear phishing and phishing and all the emails that are from the CEOs saying go buy me 200 eBay gift cards for $50 each?
Yeah, I mean the email is the very most popular threat coming in through an endpoint. And so we talked about EDR in the previous layer. If something gets into your system and starts to manifest itself, the EDR will take care of that. But the email threat protection will really sit on top of the email, and before you even click on a link, it will determine that link is actually nefarious. And so the email layer is really about stopping somebody from even initiating a cyber threat by checking the email. And this also often acts as spam protection as well in parallel. So in
Hmm.
addition to reducing spam, you're also mitigating any of these spear phishing attacks. And as you said, some of these can be quite sophisticated and really look like they're coming from someone that maybe you work for or a close friend that's sharing something with you that might seem very natural. So it's very difficult to detect these sometimes.
And this one is also learning as well, right? So if it's learning that you're emailing, my email address, cwiggins at PulseOne, and you're emailing with me, and then all of a sudden you get an email that has, instead of two G's, it has three G's, or PulseOne has two L's versus one L, but it's undetected by the natural human glance that it's not me, it's from a bad guy. And these email threat protections learn that and give you the warning right on, oops, this is not the normal email address you're emailing.
Yeah, and that's when we talked about how savvy these cyber criminals are becoming. This is exactly the point: is they're sending emails that really look legitimate, and you have to look very carefully and pay close attention to recognize that they're not. So this is the crucial reason why these tools are really not leaving it up to the end user anymore, and having some kind of sophisticated software that's helping people from really doing something that they didn't intend to do.
That's great.
The web security layer can help to identify websites that are going to be malicious in nature. And many times these are, again, things that are coming from a link in an email or some email, some URL that somebody shares with you over social media or through some kind of chat program. And they say, hey, check out this website. And you go there to look for something, but at the same time, there's a malicious code being downloaded onto your machine in parallel. So the web layer is really about understanding what URLs you're going to and mitigating any of the threats that are being delivered through a website.
So all web browsing, so all users, whether they're inside an office or working from home, all of this filtering is applied to all those end users.
That's correct. Yeah, you don't have to be sitting in an office. This can be something that's delivered through the web, and any user with inside your organization will still benefit from the limitations of the risky websites that otherwise you might go to.
And then number seven, the last layer, backups and continuity solutions.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about all these different layers, you can see we're trying to stop people from going to bad websites, from downloading, malicious links in an email through the firewall. All these different things we've talked about. But at the end of the day, it's a really smart idea to have very current and reliable backups of all your data. This is what's going to allow you to recover not only individual files but complete servers or other data sources that you may be protecting in your environment. And so this is kind of like the final layer. This is something that when all else fails, you'll be able to recover your data. And this is really targeting against attacks that are trying to be malicious, either destroying data or encrypting things like ransomware, where they want to try to charge you money to get back at your data. A good backup solution and a business continuity solution can allow you to reset the environment prior to when that infection occurred.
Yeah, because what we're learning is it's not if, it's when, right? And there's no silver bullet. We can there's no silver bullet anymore, right? And if you don't have the ability to restore your data, restore your servers, restore your environment, you could be in a really bad place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the key here is that these cyber criminals are very sophisticated. They continue to just increase the volume of attacks and all different size companies. So this isn't something that's any longer just limited to the largest companies. They're going all the way down into small to medium businesses. And so what we're laying out here on this Tech Talk is just a nice, relatively simple set of solutions that you can layer into your environment to really keep you as protected as you can be and still at a reasonable financial cost.
Yeah, and something you and I discussed earlier too is it doesn't mean that you have to have all of these solutions either as well, right? So if you're an IT guy in an internal IT department and you have some of these layers already, you can layer in, email threat protection and web security, but you already have a great backup continuity plan. So talk to me a little bit more about that, having um, customizing this layered approach.
Yeah, that's a great point, which is that I think the approach we've taken is to be able to use some best of breed technologies in each of these different layers. And so if somebody already has, for example, a complete backup strategy with their own solution in place, that's fantastic. But they still may not have a SIM tool. They may still need to do log ingestion, or maybe they're not, they have kind of old school antivirus on the endpoints and they want to move more to an EDR solution. So yeah, the beauty of what we've set up here is you can start to layer in some of these things where you need them. And we've even seen some of the smaller customers that don't even have a server, and they're really focused on the endpoint because it's a serverless environment. So there, you may not need to use a SIM tool, but maybe you'd focus heavily on the web filtering, the email, and the EDR. So that's a great point that you can start to put these things in. Not necessarily, it's not all or nothing. You can kind of layer in different pieces depending on the environment and what's required.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Nick. That was super informative, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Let's keep everybody safe out there with some great security solutions, and thanks again for the time.
You're welcome. Thank you.